We are here to really talk about self-love, and we are focusing on self-love for true love. You know, that we can't have really one without the other. And we really want to hear what you have to say, because what you say is just so profound, and you just have this global aspect and reach. And so, without me saying anything else, just please share what our spiritual superstars really need to know in the area of self-love when we're talking about relationship.
Well, thank you so much. So, for me, the first thing that comes to mind and heart when I hear the term self-love is I have this urge to ask people, what does it mean for you? Or what does it symbolize for you? How can you relate to that term self-love? And what meaning does that have in your life? And how does it play out in your life? So if you can define it in your own terms, not by some clinical Oxford dictionary definition of it, but more so, what does it actually mean for you in conceptual terms, so philosophical, emotional terms, but also practical terms. And if we can come to an understanding or a connection to that term, to what the process or the praxis, the practice, the pragmatic embodiment of self-love means, that's a starting point. Now, I know I haven't answered your question per se, but I always want people to really think about and feel into. So simultaneously, almost collapsing, equilibrating, sublimating is through the body and through the mind, is really understanding what self-love is, because it's so important in terms of how we actually navigate our way through relationships, intimate romantic relationships in particular, how we treat ourselves, how we view ourselves, because how we view ourselves is essentially going to lay the foundation for how we view others and how we treat others and how we choose to move through the world. And for me, that's so important, that we have a grounded connection to self-love. And self-love presents itself in different forms for so many different people. There's cultural influences, there's historic conditioning, there's individual circumstances that one has been exposed to during their life that will influence, at least at the beginning, what self-love actually means for them. And I always find that quite interesting. But for me, there's a balance point. There's a balance point between, and I have this term called selfish selflessness. And it's a balance. Excuse me. It's a balance between looking after one's own interests in a healthy, connected way. And we do that by simultaneously considering those that are in our lives as well, and their health and their well-being and their needs. Now, when we do that, and we do that simultaneously, we begin to embody love. We begin to embody self-love. We begin to embody sincere care for others and sincere care for ourselves, because we begin to place attention to what our needs are, but also what the needs of others are. And we begin to then move through our relationships with a very specific intention. If we don't look after ourselves and we don't care for who we are, we don't value, identifying what value we bring to the world is a component of self-love. Identifying our worth to ourselves, to our own journey, to our own evolution, and the worth that we bring to others and our communities, that's the essence of self-love, is really connecting to that acknowledgement of self and one's wonders and one's attributions and one's character. It's really a process of self-gnosis, and becoming acquainted with every aspect of self possible, that wisdom that we embody when we begin to explore who we are as people. We begin to be, on your wall there's be grateful. It's being in deep gratitude for who we are and what we are. That's powerful. That's life-changing. That's shifting. That shifts the paradigm of how we treat ourselves, and of course, how we then treat others in intimate relationship as well.
So essentially, we need to become acquainted with ourselves first, bottom line, in order to expect to have a healthy relationship with someone else.
I believe so. And for the many people that I work with and my own personal journey, it's when I began to really become intimately acquainted with myself
Mm-hmm.
and began to not only acknowledge and recognize the value that I brought to others, but to appreciate that value and to appreciate the value that I bring to myself, to be in gratitude for the experiences that I have chosen consciously and unconsciously to cultivate for myself in this life.
Mm-hmm.
And the appreciation piece and the gratitude piece is so deeply important. And it's empowering because it empowers us to then explore further into, okay, if I'm just noticing this now, what else is there that I can notice? And asking quality questions. So the quality of the questions that we ask ourselves in life will determine the quality of the life that we live.
Mm-hmm.
And being grounded and connected to that allows us to be open to the possibility of transformation, but also to the possibility of openness, of vulnerability, of shared intimacy, of conscious communication, of deeper connections in our lives. And we all value that. One of the basic human needs is love and connection. We need that. And to feel significant, but to feel significant from a place of health, of healthy ego, of healthy connection to self. And to be able to do that, we must explore and we must acknowledge it's a balance point. It's acknowledging the balance in life that we often miss that in life. We polarize our perspectives because we choose to focus on what is working, which is nothing wrong with that, but we negate the other aspects of self that make us whole, such as maybe a few years ago we made a choice that hurt others or hurt us. And we don't acknowledge that. We don't take ownership of that. We don't recognize that. We don't embrace that as part of who we've been and the learning and the teaching that's come from that in order for us to then grow and almost transcend that experience, not to devalue it, but to move on from it. So many of us remain stuck in the past. And we remain stuck in the past from a perspective of apathy or some form of negative emotion that has outrun its course because we're not learning from it. So we then begin to operate in the present moment from those negative emotions that are debilitating, that are destabilizing, that stunt our growth and stunt our capacity to express because we're coming from fear, we're coming from doubt and confusion as opposed to openness and clarity.
Absolutely. So really, as we dig deeper into our own truth, we're able to transform, but at the same time, I feel like we're able to do that by really aligning our human with our spirit, with us. We are the soul. So as we come back as one, we have that overwhelming truth of the fear that you just spoke of. And that, that thin line of the memory that we're bringing up that's creating that fear. And so, what suggestions do you have for us to, bridge that gap of happiness so that we can be in a healthy relationship with another? And I guess first and foremost with ourselves.
Powerful question. We tend to externalize our happiness and we become reliant on our motivation for life becomes reliant on what's external to us. And without going into the paradox of internal reality and external reality and the mirroring effect of that, it's important to understand the more we place our well-being or our state, our emotional state, our spiritual state, our physiological state, to be reliant on others or to be reliant on our external environment. So if this occurs, I'll be happy. If I win $1 million, I'll be happy. If I have the love of my life, I'll be happy. If I'm able to purchase this, I'll be happy. If I'm able to go there, I'll be happy. If I'm able to experience this, I'll be happy. Because we're in a perpetual state of pursuing happiness but never embodying it. So when we come back into ourselves and we begin to see gratitude, not only physiologically but psychologically and emotionally, brings us into the present moment. It grounds us into the present moment. When I'm speaking to grounding, I'm definitely speaking to connecting to earth. I'm definitely speaking to polarizing positive ions and bring more negative ions into our lives. But I'm also speaking to being present. I'm also speaking to being in the now. I'm also speaking to understanding and realizing that wholeness is an inside job. Wholeness is something that's cultivated within ourselves. And if we're constantly in an incessant pursuit of attaining wholeness outside of ourselves, we'll never get that. So we'll always be missing. We'll always be attempting to fill a void. See, for me, the formula I have for happiness, because happiness is important. Happiness is undervalued as well. It's valued, but it's not really deeply understood. And happiness is really us being content in the present moment, us being deeply connected and open in the present moment. So when we understand who we are with great clarity, when we understand our purpose or purposes, our mission, our reason for being here, our reasons for contribution to something that is greater than ourselves, and we have clarity on our lives, and that's a process, that's a journey, that's an exploration that requires unraveling and attention and intention and deep presence as well, and a yearning to do so, a deep yearning, a willingness, and to put in the effort to be resilient, to be emotionally, mentally, spiritually tough and resilient, which can be very challenging. And we move through that journey and we align our actions of every day with that clarity, because we value that, because it's for us, it's a means to self-reflect. It's a means to understand self, to know self, to feel self. We begin to cultivate meaning and fulfillment in our lives. And the more we do that, there's an effect of gratitude, appreciation, meaning, fulfillment, gratitude, appreciation, meaning, fulfillment. And that really just lays the foundations down for happiness. That really props happiness. And that's the simplicity of it. And then we'll begin to really connect to self and understand self in a different way, in a way that is connected, in a way that we're not searching for something to fill us, but rather we are so present in every moment that we are able to observe the wonder, the wonderment, the value, the worthiness in every single moment. So like anything, thoughts influence our cells, they influence our physiology. And thoughts will, depending on the type of thought and the emotion, the feeling that is attached to that thought, will allow the cell to vibrate at a certain level, because it's in constant flux. And that vibration is emitted out into our environment. So when we say, what you think you attract, at a physiological sense, at a neurochemical sense, at a biochemical sense, it's very true. Beyond that, though, the state that we choose to focus on and our neural attentive faculties and how we integrate that with our thoughts and our belief systems and what we value in life, we'll begin to notice in our environment that alignment. So if we are having thoughts of contentment and connection and groundedness, we will bring more of that into our lives, or we will rather notice more of that in our lives. So then we'll begin to connect to people that are of similar values. We'll begin to connect to people of similar ethos and philosophy, and that share a same passion or inspiration for life and for love as well. So the transitions become seamless. They're not without their challenges, of course. They're not without their problems. That's an integral part of life. I mean, problems are puzzles. Yeah, there's just challenges to overcome for us to grow. And in fact, sometimes the most difficult challenges lead us to the most profound states of growth and empowerment. But being mindful of our thoughts, of our inner state, of our emotional well-being, of our emotional self, our emotional fitness, that lends itself to then bringing in a very particular type of love or experience in our lives that is aligned with our greatest intention, our highest values. So we come back full circle again to how well do you know yourself, or how well are you on a journey of knowing yourself? Because you never know yourself in full. You may in that moment, then another moment passes and more information comes to you, more new experiences are had, and you then know something else about yourself, or you need to know something else about yourself. And knowledge isn't just intellectual, an embodiment of the four bodies, the emotional, the spiritual, the physical, and the psychological.
Yes, that is amazing. Okay, so I have been blessed by listening to something you put out there on narcissistic behavior disorder. And that is coming up quite frequently. And I just feel like there's a profound unraveling happening. And yeah, and I feel like many of us are feeling it and questioning, okay, looking back, hindsight, you know, and really picking it apart, what kind of, you know, what kind of insight can you really share with us about that behavior when it comes to self-love? And I guess I'll stop right there.
Narcissistic personality disorder is, it's a serious disorder, isn't it? Disorder. It's a serious condition. It's a serious state. It's a serious embodied state. And when I say serious, it's thrown around a lot in modern social circles, I suppose, and it's often misunderstood as well. We can have narcissistic traits. So, for example, hyper self-absorption or hyper selfishness is a very simple example, is a narcissistic trait. But if someone displays that, it does not necessarily mean that they have narcissistic personality disorder. There are varied traits that comprise, that allow us to understand, okay, this person has on the spectrum, has a high level of narcissistic personality disorder, is really very much entrenched in that space. But to label people immediately, that's dangerous, because it places them in a box, and then they generally will operate from that box or from that set of conditions that they label against. With respect to your question around NPD or narcissism or narcissistic characteristics or narcissistic expressive states and self-love, the narcissist struggles to love self. The narcissist comes from entrenched fear, essentially, and the fear varies. But the narcissist cannot love self, and therefore has not the capacity to love others in a healthy way, in a connected way, in an open way, in a vulnerable way, in a way of sharing, in a way of equilibration and conscious communication and equal exchange, or equity in exchange. They don't have, it's not that they neurologically don't have that capacity. Although, and look, extensive studies are being done in this area with respect to personality disorder and what is happening in the brain, and we're still at the forefront of that. We're still at the precipice of that in terms of in the scientific community or the medical community, the neurological community, the neuroscience community, with respect to neuropsychobiology and so forth. But the narcissist, and this is where people really, because we come from where we think. So if we have a particular idea about something, we have a particular predisposed philosophy or ideology about something or a belief system, we naturally, organically, unconsciously expect people to just understand where we come from, the space that we occupy. So when we love fully and we love openly and we have health in that, and others can't do the same, it's like we ask, why isn't that happening? Why can they not do that? Why can they not be like me? Why can they not give me the love that I'm giving them? Why can they not give me the respect, the attention, the reverence, the trust that I'm giving them? It's because of their conditioning. Historically, they're in so much pain. They come and operate from fear, and that's all they know. Now, can that change? Some say that if you're entrenched in NPD and you have narcissistic traits that are on the spectrum of, yes, you have narcissistic personality disorder, some people say you can't come back from that. I disagree. But there's still more research and I'm very happy to be proven differently, of course. I disagree because we all have a capacity to transmute and transform. We just need the right conditions to do so. We need practice, we need patience, we need persistence. And some of that undoing requires a great deal of effort and work. Now, as an individual who's with someone who has narcissistic personality disorder, it's not for anyone to say, yes, stay with them, remain with them, be persistent, keep practicing, be patient, because it can be debilitating to the soul, it can be debilitating to the relationship, to the self, to the health of someone. That's That's a question that can only be answered by the individual. And it really depends on the dynamic of that relationship and how they interpret the value of that relationship. But ultimately, if there isn't an equity in exchange, and there's not equity in giving and receiving, and there's not expressed mutual respect and reverence, the relationship will suffer, irrespective of what an individual has or has not got with respect to their personality.
Right. Right. So you talked a little bit about boundaries, and I am a biggie on boundaries and valuing oneself and having a certain bag of standards. You know, you have that deeply within, and being able to apply that in relationship, be it romantic, platonic, parental, so on and so forth. Boundaries are a huge deal. So when we talk about self-love and healthy boundaries, what kind of insight can you give us there?
The detail and the clarity of our boundaries will be determined by how well we know ourselves. And really understanding our values, really knowing with clarity what we want in life and what we will accept and what we won't accept. And that essentially comes from a place of holism, or relating to the wholeness of who we are. In other words, embodying and embracing everything that we are in life. The shadow element of self, the stuff and the behaviors and the actions and the reactions and the experiences that we've had or partaken in or expressed that we don't necessarily align with, but we don't suppress or oppress that, but rather we bring that into the self. We assimilate, we integrate, we connect to, we value, we observe the benefit, we observe the worth of that, and we bring that into our lives in order to grow. We will struggle to set boundaries if we have low self-worth, if we have low self-esteem. If we consistently pursue ideas, or rather we pursue experiences outside of ourselves to determine our inner state of well-being, we will struggle to set boundaries, and we won't know when enough is enough. So we'll come back to that knowing of self, that feeling of self, that embodiment of self, that spending time with self. And there are many tools and techniques and practices that we can engage in. Spending silent time. I mean, science demonstrates this, actually. It's interesting. Spending regular time by yourself, with yourself, in silence and stillness and solitude. It enhances brain integration. It enhances our state of well-being. Our physiological markers rise. But it has to be done with an intention. It has to be done with an understanding, a connection to why as well. That enhances that state. When we need outside of ourselves, our well-being is predicated upon that. We will struggle to set emotional and relational boundaries. And we will be used, and we will come more from fear and confusion and doubt and unhealthy attachment styles per se. And we will debilitate our own sense of self-worth further and further. And that spiral just perpetuates, and then again, the boundaries become less clear, and the boundaries that we set are really, they're not, we think they are of service to others, but they're not, because we're also enabling the behavior, the negative behavior, the unhealthy behavior of others, and we're allowing ourselves to be exposed to experiences and circumstances that are also debilitating to our own growth as well, and our emotional state too.
Right. That is so dangerous. And, you know, knowing that you have someone that has, low self-esteem, lack of confidence, lack of support, and you take that person out into the world, and he or she really is seeking love, seeking romantic love, you know, that we need that, as we talked about earlier. We need that companionship. And are they prepared? And how can they begin to get prepared if they're not?
You know, often we move through life, and life is preparation. What's it preparing us for? There's no end point. It's an evolving end point. We're just in constant preparation. By that I mean we're just in constant growth and constant learning. But so many of us miss the importance of our experiences that we choose not to reflect diligently on our experiences and ask ourselves, you know, the quality of the questions we ask determines the quality of the lives that we live and our state of well-being. What have I learned from this experience? What have I gained from this relationship? Have I served in this relationship? Could I have been differently in this relationship? Could I have behaved in a more connected way? Did I give my fullness to this relationship? Was I vulnerable enough? Did I live to a set of ideals and principles that I can be proud of, that I can honour within myself? Did I behave in a way that allowed the relationship to grow and to flourish? Now, here's an interesting thing. First of all, very few people do that when they come out of a relationship. It's either for the majority of us, it's quite traumatic. So we just move into the state of survival, and we move to what is familiar, whether it be comfort food, some form of externality, alcoholism, workaholism, drugs, distractions of some sort, whether it could be exercise, it could be partying, it could be socializing, and we never really heal from the relationship. Therefore, not healing means not growing, not learning. And in order for that to occur, is we're distracting or we're avoiding. But why even wait for something traumatic or difficult or challenging to occur? Why not ask these questions every day? So at the end of the day, prior to retirement for the evening, prior to sleeping and resting, ask these questions. How have I been today? Who have I been today? What were some of the wonderful experiences that I had today? Did I have an opportunity to give today? What was I grateful for today? Could I have been different? Could I have been better today? Could I have improved my attitude, my expressive nature? Did I give love today? Did I receive love today? Was I open to receiving love today? These are just some questions, of course. What was a pain point that I experienced today? Did I experience it? Did I be truly grateful? What was the most fun thing or experience that I had today? And learning from our experiences. This learning allows us to have fuller relationships, this movement into self-this attention, into the heart, into the mind, into the relational aspect of self, because we're relational beings, allows us to have fuller, more whole relationships. And that becomes empowering not only for us, but for the journeys of others and the lives of others that we touch and we connect with.
Right. So when you talk about that connection, that just triggered something in me that is really powerful. And I feel like one of the biggest aspects that is missing in relationship is that emotional connection. And in my soul, that is going to always be remiss if you don't have that connection with self, and you're not in, the embodiment of self-love. But can you share a little bit about the importance of having an emotional connection and what it might look like when it's not there?
Yeah, well, I mean, when it's not there, when we lack an emotional connection to self, we're void of having an ability to express how we feel, we limit the quality of our experiences. We become more rigid in what we actually experience. And that's sad, because on a spectrum, we're missing out on so much. We're missing out on so much vibrancy in life, essentially, by not having an emotional compass that allows us to healthily express ourselves when we're feeling something. Many people are in avoidance of feelings, even happiness, for various reasons, for conditioning, for limiting beliefs that have been adopted as a young person as we're moving through life in that hypnagogic state. We're exploring and evaluating life, and we take on limiting beliefs, or we take on beliefs rather that limit our ability to express ourselves fully. And they're unconscious, and we're not even aware of them. It becomes an implicit exercise, and we could just be walking one day and we smell something and it triggers this fear within us, but we don't know where the fear is coming from. And that's the implicit memory taking place, stemming from the hypothalamus and working with the amygdala and working with the brainstem, and we just move into this state of fear, and we become debilitated. And then we become less open to life. We become reluctant in giving ourselves, because we fear that if we give ourselves, we open ourselves, and that could lead to annihilation. That's the feeling that we often experience within. And having emotional literacy and emotional fitness is a practice. It's an embodiment practice, but it's also again being aware. Now, being aware of self, but also being aware of one's life, where we've come from, our historic dispositions as well. And speaking to emotional literacy, emotional fitness, or emotional intelligence, seemingly are relational beings. And a lot of this comes from how we self-regulate, or how we're taught to self-regulate as a young person, as a child, as a baby, how we're soothed when we're facing difficulty, how we're taken care of or not taken care of. And this can set a precedent for how we then behave in our adult relationships as well. So the relationships that we have with our primary caregivers, and what we did and did not receive consciously and unconsciously from our primary caregivers, will determine the way we act and behave in our adult relationships and in our adult lives as well. So it's essential that we surround ourselves with people that we trust, respect, and revere, in order to be able to have a healthy soundboard for mirroring or reflection with respect to how we express ourselves. And the only way to have, and this is almost the paradox, to have healthy people in our lives that we trust, respect, and revere, are if those people have done the inner work themselves. They've gone through the effort and the journey of exploring their shadow self. They know who they are, so they don't then react to aberrant behavior or emotionally violent behavior or oppressive behavior or erratic behavior, but rather they come from a place of, I'm not being triggered by this because I can see the bigger picture. I can see the connections and the perspectives that are taking place here. And by having that then reinforces in us that we do not need to behave in that way, and it's safe to actually explore and express the more vulnerable versions of self. The problem is that there's so many of us just walking around wounded, walking around unhealed per se, walking around in despair, in unconscious despair, and walking around in a destructive way. That every time we experience disharmony in our lives, which is natural, every time we experience challenge, we react from unconscious belief systems or unconscious states or perspectives, which causes the other person to react, and the cycle continues. And it's this toing and froing where no real growth is taking place, because we're not stepping back and saying, wow, there's something not quite in balance here. It's causing disconnection, disharmony, dissatisfaction in my life. What can I do about it? And that's the beginning stage of that transformation into self. And the more people that we can have in this world that are connected, and we're more often than not, we all react from a place of hurt. Right. But how we can bounce back from that, how quickly we can bounce back from that, or how long we can deter that from occurring. We come from a responsive state, which is not coming from fear, not coming from this part of the brain, not coming from the limbic system that is driving emotion and feeling, but coming more from, say, let's just say the prefrontal cortex, that of course works with every area of the brain, but it comes from a place of peace and harmony and says, I'm safe. Let me evaluate this. Let me be creative in this space. Let me not react without thought. Let me not react from a predisposed pattern, but rather let me create a new pattern that serves me and serves the individual. That becomes more empowering, but that requires practice. It requires us to be attentive to ourselves, to our inner state, and it's constant, it's consistent. It requires effort, full stop.
Right. Ooh, that is really, really deep. And I really encourage all of you beautiful spiritual superstars to really dive in to what Steph just said, because what he just really birthed into your soul is just multi-perspective, multifaceted, but all leads to self-love and happiness. And without that, there is no emotional connection with another. So it still is our responsibility and our obligation, and it's our right to be able to heal and strengthen our self-confidence and, build upon even self-esteem that hasn't been there, but we pull from, like you said, we've got experiences, we're going back down memory lane, we're pulling that, into our present, but we have that choice to choose what memory we choose to bring into our present. So with that responsibility and having that obligation to self, why not pull a positive memory to ground ourselves? Why not focus on the beauty that you spoke of earlier in our surrounding? Why not pull from every place, every iota of nature, of creation, because that's what it's there for. And we've got this never-ending journey, and it should be felt as beautiful as it truly is. It's magnificent. And that part of self-love is, like you said, being able to just bask in the glow of self in that moment and being in tune with yourself in that moment. If you're staring at the wall, if you're watching the birds, if you're looking at your skin and how beautiful it is, if you're just touching your skin and feeling just how soft it is, and falling back in love with yourself. And so those little moments are diamonds that I really do feel, we take out to the world. People see it, they feel it, they absorb it, and we're keeping that cycle going, playing it forward. You just spoke about something that really leads into the wall, that I'm going to just say that from a woman's perspective, we see it, but we feel it so deeply. We feel it so strongly in our men that have walls built up, but we have walls too. So when you talked about healing, taking that time to heal, reflect, and give ourselves that precious moment, can you speak a little bit about the conditioning that is not only just human, but focusing specifically on what a man with society measures and standards really has been conditioned to feel? Because that fear is very real.
Men, in the definition of masculinity, the parameters and the details of the modern masculine, for the larger part, for the greater collective, is quite distorted. We either reside in a place of, as men, as a collective, this is a generalisation, and be very clear on that.
Mm-hmm.
We either reside in a place of being an oppressive tyrant, ultimately coming from fear, of course, varied fear. or we reside in a polarized masculine that hides himself from the world, that does not have clarity, that does not have verticality in his posture, that is timid and that is shy and that is scared. Two sides of the same coin, essentially. And what we've done is we've taken masculinity, or defining masculinity, and we behave in ways of yesterday. But we've taken all of the negative or the dark attributes of masculinity, dark unhealthy, or light unhealthy, if you're on the side of the coin that is timid and shy and retracted and not present in the world. And we brought it into modernity and we call it masculine. In my culture, in my primary culture in Australia here, being masculine is defined by how much alcohol you can consume and how much sport you watch and how many fights you can get into when you go to the bar or the pub. Now, that sounds funny and it sounds a little bit awkward, or is that even true? But it's unconsciously and systemically plays a huge role in our society as men. And what these unhealthy expressive traits of masculinity do is you mentioned earlier, they build walls and they divide. Yeah. And we live in a patriarchal society, and we have done for thousands of years in the Western world. We're largely dominated by patriarchal principles, which again polarizes who we are. You take the simple example of, men are taught to not cry or not express their emotions because it's not manly, it's not being a man. The last time I fucking checked is we're all human and we all have a limbic system and we all have feelings and emotions that need to be expressed in a healthy way for us to grow and to learn and to adapt to our environment and to ourselves. And by denying men of this, we're denying men of their humanity. What we're also doing is we are denying the beautiful women in our lives an opportunity to also grow and learn from us as we can learn from them, because we are denying an integral aspect of self and not reciprocating that in women. So women will shut down. They will cease to be vulnerable because it's unsafe. So therefore, we are consistently dividing and parting in who we are. And that's dangerous. Now, that's a very high-level overview of an aspect of what is occurring in our society at a gender level and at a relational level and at a man and woman level, female and male level. And of course, it's far deeper than that. But we need to, as men, to go from the question that you asked initially, we need to, as men, begin to really reevaluate our definitions of masculinity. And that's one of the reasons why I developed a program, two programs. One's The Conscious Warrior and one is Reclaim Your Kingdom. Teaching men how to be men. Teaching men how to be healthy men in this world that value themselves and value others simultaneously. That have a capacity to redefine what masculinity means for them, but what that actually means for our communities and our future as well. Because if we continue to behave in the way we are behaving as a collective, as men, who are disconnected in two extreme ways, this world won't be around for much longer. That's the reality of it. And it's a tremendous disservice as a collective global family and global community. And men have such tremendous value to bring to this world. And we're stunting that, and in doing so, we're stunting others. Because what happens is when you oppress yourself and oppress others, two things happen. Either people become submissive, and therefore they're stunted either way, or they fight back violently or aberrantly, and they then begin to oppress, which also oppresses aspects of themselves, and they stunt their own growth. So either way, growth is stunted. And a primary function, if you look at any living organism in the world, on this earth, growth is a primary key to why we're here. We all wish to grow. We can't grow if we're stunted, whether it be culturally, socially, emotionally, physically, spiritually, collectively.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Steph. Thank you so much. We are going to put your information in the program so that everyone can register and we can share it. Spiritual Superstars, absolutely share his program and get the word out. You know, you just heard what he said. And that is the bottom truth, that if we don't help each other, if we don't serve the collective, it's not going to be there. We won't be there. There is a mass divide happening and has been. And so this is that dispensation for us to really do something about it and to start coming back together. He talked about the divine masculine. You can't have that without the divine feminine. And there has to be a strong alignment and a profound respect because it is all spiritual. We're not humans first. So coming on back and, you know, being able to really dial it back and to unravel is really important. So, Steph, thank you so much again for your time today. I greatly appreciate it so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I deeply appreciate it. Thank you to you and your audience as well. And of course, many blessings to your audience, and thank you for the beautiful conversation.
Many blessings.